The brazen bull was created by Pericles of Athens, a brass specialist, in the 6th century BC and offered to Phalaris, tyrant of Agrigentum, as a blessing. It was an enormous metal bull that was totally empty inside, with an entryway as an afterthought huge enough for a man to enter. When the man was inside the bull, a fire would be lit underneath it so as to cook him to death. In the leader of the bull, Pericles put a progression of cylinders and stops that were intended to enhance the shouts of the person in question and make them sound like the thunder of the bull. Interestingly, Pericles was the principal individual to feel the agony of the brazen bull. After Pericles said to Phalaris, "His screams will come to you through the channels as the tenderest, generally disgraceful, generally sweet of bellowings." Phalaris was sickened to the point that he deceived Pericles into entering the bull. Lucian relates the story. "His words revolted me. I despised the idea of such keen pitilessness, and made plans to rebuff the artificer in kind. On the off chance that this is anything over an unfilled brag, Pericles, I said to him, if your craft can truly create this impact, get inside yourself, and profess to thunder, and we will see whether the funnels will make such music as you portray." He assented. And when he was inside, I shut the opening, and requested a fire to be ignited. "Get," I cried, "the due remuneration of your wondrous workmanship. Let the music ace be the first to play." Phalaris I-12 Pericles was expelled from the bull before he passed on, and Phalaris had him lost a bluff. The brazen bull got one of the most widely recognized strategies for execution in ancient Greece. Hanging, drawing and quartering was a basic type of discipline in England for the wrongdoing of injustice, which was viewed as the most exceedingly terrible wrongdoing you could submit. The discipline was just applied to men. Ladies saw as liable of injustice were copied at the stake. Unfathomably, this discipline stayed in law until 1814. The first phase of the execution was to be attached to a wooden casing and hauled behind a pony to the spot of your demise. Following that, the criminal would be hanged until they were almost dead. The criminal would then be expelled from the noose and laid on a table. The killer would then gut and castrate the person in question, and consume the insides before his eyes. He would in any case be alive now. The individual would then be decapitated and their body sliced into quarters. Samuel Pepys, in his celebrated journal, was an onlooker at one of these executions. "To my lords in the first part of the day, where I met with Captain Cluttance, yet my lord not being up, I went out to Charing Cross to see Major General Harrison hanged, drawn, and quartered, which was done there, he looking as lively as any man could do in that condition. He was directly chopped down, and his head and heart appeared to the individuals, at which there was extraordinary yells of bliss. It is stated that he said that he made certain to come in no time at the correct hand of Christ to pass judgment on 'em that currently had made a decision about him, and that his significant other do expect his returning once more. In this manner it was my opportunity to see the king guillotined at Whitehall, and to see the main gore in retribution for the blood of the king at Charing Cross. The typical practice was to send the 5 pieces of the body to different zones where they would be put in plain view on a gibbet as a notice to other people. Consuming at the stake was ordinarily done in one of 2 different ways. In the main, the casualty would be lead to the focal point of a mass of sticks and straw and attached to the stake, after which the space between the lawbreaker and the divider would be loaded up with wood, disguising the individual. It is accepted this is the way wherein Saint Joan of Arc was singed. The other strategy was to heap sticks and straw up to the degree of the calves only. When performed by a gifted killer, the individual would consume in this arrangement calves, thighs and hands, middle and lower arms, bosoms, upper chest, face, and afterward at last passing Obviously this would have been painful. In the event that countless individuals were to be singed simultaneously, demise could happen through carbon monoxide harming before the fire contacted you. In the event that the fire was little, you could pass on of stun, blood misfortune, or heat stroke. In later forms of consuming at the stake, the criminal would be hanged until dead and afterward consumed emblematically. This strategy for execution was utilized to consume witches in many pieces of Europe, yet it was not utilized in England for that reason. Lingqi, execution by moderate cutting, was polished in China until it was banned in 1905. In the execution, the criminal is gradually cut in the arms, legs, and chest, until at long last they are guillotined or wounded in the heart. Numerous Western records of the execution strategy are to a great extent overstated, with some asserting that the execution could take days to perform. One present-day Observer report from journalist and politician Henry Norman depicts an execution along these lines. The criminal is secured to an unpleasant cross, and the killer, outfitted with a sharp blade, starts by getting a handle on bunches from the meaty pieces of the body, for example, the thighs and the bosoms, and cutting them off. After this he evacuates the joints and the excrescences of the body individually, the nose and ears, fingers and toes. At that point the appendages are slit off piecemeal at the wrists and the lower legs, the elbows and knees, the shoulders and hips. At long last, the casualty is cut to the heart and his head cut off. The breaking wheel was otherwise called the Catherine wheel, and it was a medieval execution gadget. The criminal would be appended to a truck, haggle arms and legs loosened up along the spokes. The wheel would be made to turn while a substantial metal bar or sledge would convey bone-breaking hits to different pieces of the body between the spokes. In the event that a benevolent execution had been requested, after countless bones were broken, deadly blows would be conveyed. In situations where benevolence was not offered, the criminal would stay on the wheel until they kicked the bucket. This could once in a while take days, and the individual would bite the dust of sun and dehydration after the breaking was finished. The appendages of the individual would be woven between the spokes and the wheel would be lifted to the highest point of a shaft for feathered creatures to eat the, occasionally as yet living, body. In France, a unique effortlessness was in some cases offered in which the criminal would be choked to death before the blows were conveyed, or after just a few. In execution by heating up, the denounced is stripped, exposed and either positioned in a tank of bubbling fluid, or in a tank of cold fluid which was then warmed to bubbling. The fluid could be oil, corrosive tar, water, or liquid lead. During the rule of King Henry VIII, it was a discipline particularly held for poisoners. The prelude of the Resolution of Henry VIII, which made harming treachery, in 1531 discusses that one Richard Roos, or Coke, a cook, by placing poison in some food planned for the family unit of the religious administrator of Rochester and for the poor of the ward of Lambeth, murdered a man and lady. He was seen liable of treachery and condemned as bubbled to death without advantage of ministry. He was openly bubbled at Smithfield. Around the same time, a housekeeper hiling for harming her fancy woman was bubbled at King's Lynn. Encyclopaedia Britannica. 1911. The Narrative of the Grey Friars of London, distributed by the Camden Society, has a record of a case at Smithfield, in which a man was secured to a chain and let down into bubbling water a few times until he was dead. In present-day days, Idi Amin has been blamed for utilizing this strategy for execution on his adversaries. Execution by flaying is the point at which the skin of the criminal is expelled from their body with the utilization of an extremely sharp blade. Endeavors are made to keep the skin unblemished. This is an old technique for execution. The witness, Bartholomew, was excoriated and killed topsy-turvy. His skin and bones are kept in a cathedral in Sicily. There are records of Assyrians excoriating the skin from a caught adversary or defiant ruler and nailing it to the mass of his city, as notice to all who might resist their capacity. The Aztecs of Mexico excoriated survivors of custom human penance, for the most part after death. While this strategy for execution isn't legal in any nation, in 2000, government troops in Myanmar, Burma, purportedly excoriated the entirety of the guys of a Karenni town. Necklacing is a kind of execution where an elastic tire is loaded up with fuel, constrained over the arms and chest of the person in question, and set land. It was a typical practice in South Africa during the 1980s and 1990s. Enemy of politically sanctioned racial segregation struggle, necklacing sentences were once in a while passed on against supposed crooks by individuals. Courts, set up in dark townships as a method for going around the politically sanctioned racial segregation legal framework. Necklacing was likewise used to rebuff individuals from the dark network who were seen as associates with the politically sanctioned racial segregation system. These included dark police officers, town councillors and others, just as their family members and partners. The training was as often as possible completed for the sake of the African National Congress (ANC), and was even embraced by Winnie Mandela, at that point spouse of the detained Nelson Mandela and a senior individual from the ANC, despite the fact that the ANC authoritatively censured the training. Wikipedia: necklacing has likewise occurred in Brazil and Haiti, and in any event one individual was murdered by this technique in Nigeria during Muslim fights over the Muhammad cartoons. Scaphism is an ancient Persian strategy for execution. As indicated by Wikipedia, a bare individual would be immovably affixed inside a consecutive pair of limited rowboats, or in certain varieties an emptied-out tree trunk, the head, hands, and feet jutting from this ad-libbed compartment. The sentenced had to ingest milk and nectar to the point of creating serious looseness of the bowels, and progressively nectar would be scoured on his body in order to draw in creepy crawlies to the uncovered limbs. They would then be left to coast on a stale lake, or on the other hand, essentially presented to the sun someplace. The helpless person's defecation amassed inside the holder, drawing in more bugs, which would eat and raise inside their uncovered, and progressively gangrenous, substance. Demise, when it in the long run happened, was likely because of a blend of drying out, starvation and septic shock. Plutarch composes that it took Mithridates 17 days to bite the dust by this technique for execution. Local American Indians likewise utilized a comparative strategy for execution where they would attach the casualty to a tree, smear him and leave him to the ants. Since he was not already coercively fed, he would by and large starve in a couple of days. In execution by sawing, the criminal would be hung topsy-turvy and a huge saw would be utilized to slice their body down the middle, beginning with the crotch, right to the head. Since the individual was hanging topsy-turvy, the mind got adequate blood to keep them alive until the saw at last arrived at the principal veins in the midsection. In the Asian form of this execution, the casualty would stand up standing and the sawing would start at the highest point of the head. Some conventions express that the prophet Isaiah was executed by the saw. It is accepted that St. Paul is making reference to this in his epistle to the Hebrews chapter 11 verse 37, "They were stoned, they were cut in two, they were enticed, they were killed by the blade. They meandered about in sheepskins, in goatskins, being in need, upset, burdened." This strategy for execution was utilized in the Middle East, Europe, and parts of Asia. It was additionally utilized in the Roman Empire and was viewed as the most loved discipline handed out by Emperor Caligula.